factual unveiling of America's most genocidal and criminal companies, most incompetent and most hurtful to humanity. Start with the banks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a banking crisis in this country. It is not a fiscal crisis, but one of ethics and simple honesty.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, this is Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and human rights author of 325 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and my latest, Israel Strikes Iran. Ours is a show for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. Subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. Please, if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. So you can go to theedwinblackshow.com/support and keep us independent. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by members of the Jewish community of Los Angeles, and Kenneth Abramowitz has just released Audible audiobook for his best-selling and prize-nominated book, The Multi-Front War. That's his third audio edition, by the way. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, speaks frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a turbulent future, still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show. Before I sign off, Item 1, here's a second Holocaust update, courtesy of the New York Times. More precisely, it is courtesy of New York Times reporter and columnist Nick Kristof. Just as the Civil Commission was releasing its comprehensive 298-page report entitled Silent No More, documenting how Hamas systematically raped and committed ghastly sexual violence against women, girls, and men. A profound investigation that included more than 10,000 photographs and video segments, more than 1,800 hours of visual material, more than 430 testimonies and interviews with survivors, witnesses, released hostages, and family members. A report vetted and signed off by prominent international personalities, from Hillary Clinton to Rahm Emanuel, and from archive documentation experts to international sexual violence experts. And what happens? The virulently anti-Israel New York Times published a sickening blood libel strongly asserting that Palestinians were being systematically raped, including by specially trained rape dogs. Not since the Middle Ages, not since Henry Ford and Julius Streicher have we heard such malignant lies. Kristof's false reporting, actually a recycle of old idiotic allegations, seems to many time to undercut this important October 7th rape commission. The Wall Street Journal called Kristof's article a poorly sourced, fantastical tale of torture and dog rape in Israel. That's a quote. Gerald Steinberg, founder of the NGO Monitor, wrote that the column was, quote, perhaps the most toxic and idiotic piece that Nick Kristof has put his name on. Quickly, this piece inflamed Jew hatred among the crazies, who have been repeating it with frenzy, has only added yet another permission slip to those perpetrating violence against Jewish people across North America and Europe. This outrageous piece of pseudo-journalism adds to the growing list of outrageous journalistic crimes the New York Times has committed against Israel. This includes the fake Gaza starvation photo of an infant who with skin and bones protruding, but then we learn he has a special spinal defect, and then his fat-bellied brother standing next to him has been cropped out of the frame. It's time to recognize that the New York Times has become the Dearborn Independent of our day. Most of you remember that Henry Ford used the Dearborn Independent with a circulation of some 900,000 readers, second only to the New York Times, to smear Jews and spread tales of a massive Jewish conspiracy. Ford's paper was studied by Adolf Hitler, and he called it his inspiration. Hitler even quoted its content in Mein Kampf. But the Dearborn Independent wasn't always an anti-Semitic mouthpiece. It was actually launched in 1901 and staffed by some of Detroit's top newspapermen, only after Ford purchased it in 1918 to become the Ford Motor Company's official pro-Hitler and anti-Jewish newspaper did it become the global standard for Jewish slander, including the Looney Tune Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So the Dearborn Independent changed, and that's when the lawsuits for Jewish slander started, and that's what drove the Dearborn Independent out of business. I hear from Jewish leaders and intellectual stalwarts that it is time to put the New York Times out of business, as was done to the Dearborn Independent. Challenge its postal permit, which allows taxpayer money to subsidize its mailing costs. Challenge its advertisers. Cancel subscriptions. Bill Ackman, CEO of Pershing Square, was quoted in the Jewish News Service's boycott coverage stating that the Times, quote, ran a disinformation campaign using Nicholas Kristof as the front man. Ackman gave his solution in 3 words, quote, shut it down, close quote. Legal experts are already noting that Kristof's editorial tripe, which claimed to be well-researched and factual, was actually run in the opinion section. The lawyers are guessing this was to protect from lawsuits, as just opinion is protected. But the experts, including me, suggest that running the piece in opinion instead of news was an admission that the facts were thinner than thin. Remember, false assertions of fact, even in an opinion piece, are not protected journalism. Stay tuned. Decent people broke the Dearborn Independent. The New York Times may be facing the same fate. Wait, just announced, Prime Minister Netanyahu declares the state of Israel will sue the New York Times. As I speak, a monster rally outside the New York Times offices demands 3 things: retract, reveal, and retrain. Item 2. Lebanon has been a tragic hotspot for generations, a beautiful country long tormented by Iran, which has inserted its Hezbollah terrorist group to bring war with Israel and obstruct peace with its neighbors, including Israel. Peace with Israel is often spoken of by Lebanon's Maronite Christian community. Hezbollah threatened to destroy any effort to achieve a bilateral peace. But things are coming to a head in Israel and in Lebanon. Here is Joseph Gebeily, a top expert on Lebanon's geopolitical and regional situation. He sits on the executive council of the Lebanese Forces political party. He normally lives in Beirut. Joseph, thank you for joining us. What's the status of the peace talks with Israel and the Hezbollah issue? Take the mic, Joseph.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you for hosting me. And I very much appreciate the work that you're doing and your very insightful and informative show. So Lebanon, as you rightfully said, has now a historic opportunity with this peace process being launched very recently. Now, for decades, Lebanon has been held hostage by Hezbollah. And we have to make it clear, Hezbollah is not just a simple Lebanese political party. It's very clearly an offshoot of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the so-called IRGC. And the IRGC officers and advisors have been operating in Lebanon for years, directing, financing, arming, and guiding Hezbollah. So the decisions of war and peace in Lebanon are not made in Beirut, they are made in Tehran. So as a result, Lebanon was dragged into these wars, unnecessary wars with Israel, devastating the country with death, destruction, displacement, economic collapse, and enormous suffering for the Lebanese people, who simply want stability and a normal life. But today, so something important has changed. Hezbollah, first of all, has been significantly degraded. It's isolated within Lebanon itself. Large majorities of the Lebanese people, and not just the Maronite Christians, overall Christian communities, as well as Sunnis and Druze, and even some Shiites, are fed up with Hezbollah's domination and endless wars. And opinion polls and public sentiment have shown over the past few months a very strong opposition to Hezbollah and to Iran's interference in Lebanon, and hope for peace with Israel. And for the first time in many years, we have a Lebanon government led by President Joseph Gebeily, who took the courageous position that previously government would not, which is to decide that the decisions of war and peace should be made by the Lebanese government, not by Iran or a radical militia, and that the Lebanese state should be the only one possessing the weapons and the military authority in the country. And they announced step towards disbanding the Hezbollah militia. At the same time, as you also alluded, something important happening, something historic. In more than 40 years, Lebanon and Israel are engaging into serious discussions over their relations and the future of their relation under American auspices. As a matter of fact, high-level meetings have been held at the State Department. One meeting also was held at the White House, presided by President Trump himself, between Lebanon and Israel delegations, with U.S. officials present in those meetings. Lebanon is seeking Israel withdrawal from disputed territory, the return of prisoners and the displaced from the south of the country, and the final agreement on the issue of the land borders, reaching to long-term stability and normal relations with Israel. Israel, understandably, wants security guarantees and wants definitely the disarming of Hezbollah. There are, of course, opposition from Iran and from Hezbollah, but despite everything, there is also genuine hope. Most Lebanese people are exhausted by war. They want peace, stability. They want investment, tourism, economic recovery. As you know, Lebanon was once called the Paris of the Middle East, the Switzerland of the Mediterranean. So it is hope now that with the launching of this peace process, again, under American supervision, the decision by the government to disarm Hezbollah, that the Lebanese and the Israeli people will live in peace together. And there is no deep hatred between the Lebanese and the Israeli peoples to begin with. The major obstacle has been Iran and its proxy Hezbollah. So we're hoping that the United States, with President Trump being personally invested in this process, that they will play a major role in moving this process forward. Of course, the key question is, can the Lebanese state reassert its sovereignty and successfully disarm Hezbollah? If that happens, then Lebanon truly has a historic opportunity to move away from decades of conflicts and move towards peace, sovereignty, and prosperity. Thank you.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear this update, and we both know that of course, Lebanon is a beautiful country with beautiful people, and two, that there is no enmity between the citizens of Israel and the majority of the citizens of Lebanon. The question is, and you know this question, how do we get Iran out of Hezbollah and out of Lebanon, and how do we get Hezbollah disarmed? So let's get real. In your opinion, if everything went right diplomatically, opportunistically, how long would it take to disarm Hezbollah?
So first of all, we definitely need to get Iran away from Lebanon. And there are efforts in this direction. First of all, we have to remember that the Assad regime was the prime conduit for the Iran shipping of weapons and ammunition and other military support to Hezbollah from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. Now, with the change in the regime in Syria, whether we like the new regime or not, they are definitely opposed to Iran and opposed to Hezbollah. The borders needs to be definitely fully controlled. We're not there yet. There has been effort by the Syrian government and, of course, by the Lebanese government on the other side to monitor these borders, to stop the flow of weapons. Because, as you know, Hezbollah and Iran, if they want to undermine this process, they need their weapons. Hezbollah needs its militia to be well armed to fight Israel and even to fight the Lebanese, because they've done it. So we have to stop the flow of weapons and do everything possible, again, to curtail this influx of weapons and arm material from Iran to Lebanon. That process started, which is again promising. We have to stop also the money flow, Edwin, because Hezbollah relies on money. According to the US Treasury itself, Hezbollah in 2025 has received $1 billion from Iran through different channels. There has been efforts to stop this flow of money into Lebanon. It's not easy, but it should happen. Also with the assistance of US, of the Friends of Lebanon. Hezbollah's presence abroad, through fake companies and other support from some in the Shia diaspora should stop, and Hezbollah should be designated by the majority of countries as being a terrorist organization. It has been so far designated in 26 countries. That's not enough. They should not be able to operate financially in any country in the world, in South America, in Africa, and in Europe. So that's definitely one thing to do. And if we weaken Hezbollah this way, then we weaken Iran dominance of Lebanon, intervention in Lebanon. The other thing is, of course, the role of the Lebanese government. As I said before, previous Lebanese governments until today have allowed Iran presence in Lebanon, have allowed the RGC to be present in hundreds in Lebanon, have covered Hezbollah's operations, even against Lebanese, let alone against Israel or other countries. So we have a government that's determined to stop the cover for Hezbollah. So hopefully this will start to materialize through some decisions. We have to admit, we do have what some Lebanese are calling a deep state in Lebanon now, where Hezbollah has embedded itself into judiciary, security, military, and other agencies within the Lebanese government. They need to be purged out of the Lebanese government. So that process started. As far as the timeline, I'm going to be very honest. It's not going to happen overnight and not even weeks. It's going to take maybe months or maybe a couple of years for this process to move forward. But it started already. And as long as it's moving forward, we are hopeful to reach, again, peace, stability, and a sovereignty over the Lebanese territory. And as I said, good relations with Israel.
Well, just to put a fine point on it, we're not talking about days and weeks. We're talking about months and or years. Could it be done this year? Or if everything is optimal, is it more appropriate to look at next year?
I think we should at least this year get a clear path towards this, because the path is not clear yet. It should be discussed in the meetings happening starting this week. There's a military delegation coming from Lebanon, another military delegation coming from Israel, meeting in the Pentagon, again under the auspices of the US military, to discuss the security military aspect of this whole operation. So there should be a plan put in place. Same thing is going to happen next week at the diplomatic level. What is the future of the relations between Lebanon and Israel? So at least this year, we should get a clear idea on how these paths would look like. The security path, the military, the relations, the future relation between Lebanon and Israel. The implementation could start this year, but I'm going to be honest again, Edwin, I don't think we're going to see the end of it this year. But as long as it starts, as long as we have a clear idea on how this plan looks like, how this path looks like, I think we're in good shape.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gebeily. We will have you back. And of course, all of my viewers wish only the best for Lebanon and its people.
Thank you very much, and for your viewers.
Now we turn to today's long-awaited topic, bad company, a factual unveiling of America's most genocidal and criminal companies, most incompetent and most hurtful to humanity. Start with the banks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a banking crisis in this country. It is not a fiscal crisis, but one of ethics and simple honesty. I do not know of one honest, reliable bank in this country. America's most criminal and genocidal bank is UBS, which stands for United Bank of Switzerland. UBS has more than 250 major branches across the USA. Who is UBS? The United Bank of Switzerland went into business with Adolf Hitler and became a leading cog in the machinery of theft of Jewish assets and money laundering for the Hitler regime. In 1999, UBS settled lawsuits for $1.25 billion. I was directly involved in that original investigation. In 2009, UBS faced prosecution for helping some 300 wealthy Americans hide $18 billion from tax authorities. UBS was compelled to release 4,000 confidential names of offshore account holders. In 2014, UBS purchased another criminal bank, Credit Suisse, which pled guilty to criminal charges, and UBS had to pay $2.5 billion in criminal fines for that acquisition. UBS-owned Credit Suisse continued to amaze as a major criminal institution. Last December, prosecutors in Switzerland indicted UBS, alleging that its Credit Suisse unit engineered a $2 billion scheme in Mozambique to use so-called tunable bonds to money launder. That case is currently been stalled, but just last week, prosecutors in Monaco, of all places, fined UBS $7 million, once again related to repeated money laundering violations. Next, we move to the Canadian gangster bank, Toronto Dominion Bank, also known as TD Bank, instantly recognizable for their bright green building features. TD Bank recently pled guilty to Treasury Department prosecution for money laundering for drug cartels. In 2024, TD paid $3 billion in settlements across various jurisdictions. Yes, $3 billion. Money laundering for who? Human traffickers, fentanyl traffickers, and $670 million for a Chinese organized crime ring, as well as Colombian drug cartels. Prosecutions of individual TD Bank employees are still going on. 2 prosecutions were announced just earlier this year against managers in New York and Florida. Expect many more. This is a massively dirty bank. But no bank is as corrupt and criminal as JP Morgan Chase. As far back as the Civil War, JP Morgan was involved in a scheme to transfer more than $1 million in gold bars to England to secretly drive up prices for gold, thus destabilizing the Union, and then they would reap the profit. In Nazi-occupied France, Chase seized bank accounts and safe deposit boxes from Jewish customers and turned them over to the Third Reich. A U.S. Treasury Department report declassified just a few years ago concludes that Chase's Paris branch served as a banker for the Third Reich. Chase was also central to the Reich's survival, converting seized foreign currencies in occupied countries and converting those to dollars. Between 1936 and 1941, Chase National Bank facilitated financial transactions for Nazi Germany, helping them raise over $20 million, which in today's money is $500 million. Chase was the principal financial institution facilitating the infamous Madoff Ponzi scheme. The bank entered a deferred prosecution agreement and paid $1.7 billion in penalties to resolve charges relating to its relationship with Madoff. Chase entered into yet another deferred prosecution agreement on a precious metal trading scheme, paying nearly $920 million in penalties. Last November 2025, Germany's financial watchdog imposed another $52.5 million fine on Chase. In June 2023, JP Morgan Chase agreed to a $290 million settlement to resolve a class action lawsuit filed by victims of Jeffrey Epstein. They accused the bank of facilitating Epstein's sex trafficking ring. The bank was compelled to report after the fact more than $1 billion, repeat, $1 billion, in some 5,000 illicit wire transfers to Russian banks and other platforms to cover sex trafficking. Chase has also paid $75 million to the Virgin Islands for facilitating the infamous Epstein sex island, plus another $290 million for an Epstein Victims Fund. In March of this year, JP Morgan was sued over a $328 million crypto Ponzi scheme, alleging that despite bright red flags, Chase, quote, turned a blind eye and continued servicing the accounts, earning substantial fees from the hundreds of millions of dollars, close quote. This in a Florida-based crypto scheme. That's because Chase is the bank of crooks and criminals, from the Third Reich to Madoff, and from Madoff to Epstein. I have so much more on Chase, but I need to turn my attention to the others in the first row of America's criminal banks. And that brings us to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo Bank committed the cardinal banking sin of opening millions of unauthorized accounts to pressure people into service fees. Wells Fargo paid a $3 billion penalty to prosecutors. It was additionally revealed that Wells Fargo had improperly charged more than 800,000 customers for unneeded collision protection insurance. The bank's own internal report showed that approximately 274,000 innocent customers were put into delinquency, and almost 25,000 vehicles were wrongfully repossessed due to all these additional expenses. In September 2023, investors won a $300 million judgment over this profound deception. Bank of America, also among the worst. Bank of America paid the government $727 million for illegal credit card practices, including deceptive marketing and charging fees for services never performed. In 2022, Bank of America was ordered to pay a $10 million civil monetary penalty for unlawful garnishments and a $225 million fine for botched disbursement of state unemployment benefits during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2023, the bank paid over $200 million for illegally charging junk fees, withholding credit card rewards, and opening fake accounts. And in 2024, the government sued Bank of America and others for allowing persistent fraud on Zelle. Now to the pressing question of debanking. Debanking is where a bank suddenly and without explanation gives its customers, including top customers, a certain number of days or weeks to close their accounts under forced conditions. I've seen these short letters which demand the customer close his or her accounts. They're vague and harsh. I saw one woman get a letter after 35 years of a faithful and flawless $1 million relationship. Democrats organized the debanking of their political opponents. Dr. Joseph Mercola, for example, a critic of the COVID vaccine, found his business accounts shut down by JP Morgan Chase just after Mercola spoke out against the Food and Drug Administration. Melania Trump says her bank account was terminated after the riots of January 6, 2021, and her son Barron was unable to open his own account. She called it, quote, political discrimination, close quote. Indeed, the banking industry has a new term, PEP, P-E-P, political exposed person. Jews and accounts connected to Israel have been terminated. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has reportedly received more than 15,000 complaints of Americans being debanked in this past decade. In many ways, this movement began under Obama with something his administration called Operation Choke Point. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon stated, quote, "We don't debank people because of political or religious affiliations, but there are a lot of things that can be fixed. We should fix them. The rules and requirements are so onerous, and it does cause people to be debanked, in my opinion," close quote. In January of this year, the Trump Organization sued JP Morgan for $5 billion over account closures. After Trump's suit, JP Morgan issued an official statement, quote, "Our company does not close accounts for political or religious reasons. We do close accounts because they create legal or regulatory risk for the company. We regret having to do so, but often rules and regulatory expectations lead us to do so. We have been asking both this administration and prior administrations to change the rules and regulations that put us in this position, and we support this administration's efforts to prevent the weaponization of the banking sector, period, close quote from J.P. Morgan. Chase closed the account of a religious nonprofit organization without warning. When asked to reconsider, they reportedly demanded to see the group's confidential donor list and a list of candidates they supported in upcoming elections. One of the worst offenders in debanking may be the bank I don't trust at all, Capital One. The Trump organization just sued Capital One for what may be a many $million judgment for closing down some 300 Trump accounts. Remember, another facet of America's banking crisis is incompetence. I think Truist is America's most incompetent and error-prone bank. Since the merger of SunTrust and BB&T created this new, completely unnecessary, bigger but weaker bank, Truist has shown profound incompetence in simple banking. They make errors. A check written to Prudential Insurance for one Florida woman was instead mailed to Prudential Healthcare in another state. The bank has paid millions in penalties and adverse judgments for legacy misconduct. In 2025, their chief operating officer just up and quit, walked out the door with no notice because of operational problems. His position was never even replaced. Always remember, the staff at these banks are decent, kind, hardworking people. They do not control or benefit from criminality or incompetence. Don't take your frustration out on them. We could spend all day on crooked banks, but we need to move on because corrupt healthcare corporations are literally killing this country. One of the most criminal and corrupt is Cigna. In 2023, Cigna paid a $172 million penalty to resolve federal allegations that it violated the False Claims Act. The government asserted that Cigna was artificially inflating its Medicare Advantage payments by submitting untruthful, unsupported diagnosis codes to make its enrollees appear sicker than they actually were. This is called upcoding. It is now well established that Cigna doctors reject patients' claims without even opening their files. Quote, "We literally click and submit," one former company doctor admitted to an investigator. I know of a case last month where a diabetic patient appealed the diabetic drug denial and was invited to submit materials for an appeal. But the appeal was denied just minutes later before he ever even submitted. One Cigna doctor denied 60,000 claims in just 1 month. Over a period of 2 months in 2022, Cigna doctors denied over 300,000 requests for payments using a system that allowed just 1.2 seconds on each case. Yet this is a company that administers healthcare plans for 18 million people. Humana is another exploiter of the weak. The Department of Justice sued Humana, alleging that from 2016 through at least 2021, Humana and others paid hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal kickbacks to Medicare brokers for Medicare Advantage plans. Expect these rapacious corporations who thrive off of human suffering to have wonderful websites, beautiful emails, and overseas phone staff who are completely innocent of the corporate misconduct they are part of. Don't blame these poor staffers. But what good are medical miracles and wonder drugs if the vultures who stand as gatekeepers have so well established a heartless scam? There's another category of corporate misconduct I must report. It's great companies doing great things, companies with products and services I really admire and appreciate. But they are hurting humanity by creating mass contact consumer businesses without any human voice contact. They're using robots, chats, artificial intelligence, and other non-human or artificial means to communicate. Here I include Bombas, Shopify, UPS, and other very important companies, polishing profits by creating a robotic milieu that trains people to have non-human interaction with faceless entities. This is killing humanity, one exchange at a time. I can't tell you how much I left out. So to pick up the baton and tell us more, I turned the mic over to a seasoned Wall Street guru, Kenneth Abramowitz, author of the best-selling Multi-Front War. As managing general partner and co-founder of NGN Capital, Abramowitz oversees a $500 million worldwide healthcare venture capital fund. He joined NGN from the Carlyle Group in New York, where he was managing director from 2001 to 2003, focused on U.S. buyout opportunities in the healthcare industry. For his work with NGN and Carlyle, he has been installed in the Wall Street Analyst Hall of Fame with a rank of 15 out of 15,000 analysts. Take the camera, Ken, and tell us how bad these bad companies really are.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Great to be with you as always. So I thought I'd give a quick update of healthcare, bad guys, or to various extent, and to some extent good guys. And I'm going to look at the banks, the insurance companies, and the drug companies. And I'm going to pretend I'm a professor, and I'm going to give grades. And so for the banks, I give a D. And insurance companies, B minus, drug companies, A minus. But now let me explain. Let's look at the banks first, because I've had the biggest arguments with banks. I'm the chief financial officer of a Israeli not-for-profit called Israel Independence Fund. We had an account at Citibank. We raise money in America and then send it to Israel for grassroots organizations trying to fix problems that aren't big enough for the government to be involved with. And we had an account there for 10 years. And then about 10 years ago, I got a letter from Citibank saying your account will be closed on, pick a date, 3 weeks ahead. They gave me an exact date. Take all your funds out before that. So I went to the bank and talked to just one of the bankers on the floor there. And I said, this is very unusual. They didn't give me any reason. And I said, can you call somebody? Can you call your manager? So he spent 5 minutes on the phone with the manager and came back and says, I don't have any information to give you. I said, well, why were we canceled? I can't tell you. I don't know. And is there any appeal process? No. So I said, that's it. That's it. So secondly, my foundation, SaveTheWest.com, had an account at Chase for 5 years. And then about 2 years ago, the same thing happened. I got a letter from Chase, very similar to the letter that I got from Citibank. Your account will be closed on whatever the date is, but it was roughly 3 weeks away, and take all your funds out. They didn't even say, have a nice day. They just said, that's what we're going to do. So I laughed to myself and I said, well, it reminds me of Israel Independence Fund. And I'll give you a third bank discussion. I was going to set up an account at Interactive Brokers, a brokerage firm, and for Save the West, because after Chase closed Save the West, I figured I'd go to a brokerage firm, because brokerage firms and banks are a little bit interchangeable now. And so I set up an account online. Interactive Brokers likes to do everything online. And then I kept getting questions and questions and questions by computer. I mean, humans behind the computer. And then finally they said, are you a for-profit or not-for-profit? And I said, I told you I'm a not-for-profit, but I'm waiting for my not-for-profit status. I have a request into the IRS. They said, well, we can't set up your account till you get your not-for-profit status. And I said to myself, what is a for? So I said to them by email, I said, just code it as a for-profit, that's all. And when I get not-for-profit status, so you change it to not-for-profit status. They say, no, we're not opening your account. Well, this was pure anti-Semitism. I was talking to some communists there who didn't want me as a customer. So I said to myself, that's it, I'm not dealing with these anti-Semites. Going to insurance companies, let me just spend a minute on insurance companies, a minute on drug companies. Insurance companies, people complain because the pre-certification process is cumbersome and people expect the insurance company to pay for everything. But they forget that most policies nowadays have a maximum out-of-pocket of $7,500, depending on what policy you have. So the worst thing that's going to happen to you, no matter what hospital, what doctor, whatever it is, the maximum out-of-pocket is $7,500. But people don't want to dip into that. They just want the insurance companies to cover them. So I give them a B- because they have a lot of work to do to improve their computer systems to make it more friendly to the consumer. And finally, on the drug companies, people complain about high prices, and they have high prices. But they forget that the costs are 80-90% subsidized by their employer or by the government, and they're only paying the co-payment. And the companies save people's lives, but at high prices, and they quietly provide free drugs for the uninsured. So I give them an A- for saving lives in spite of their high prices. So that's my quick update of healthcare, good and evil.
Well, Ken, that's an astonishing story that you've told. It looks like that even though you've spent your life on Wall Street, you have been victimized by these improper banking procedures. Let me ask you a question. If one individual committed the crimes that JP Morgan committed, would they still be allowed to pay a fine and continue in business? It's amazing that Madoff went to jail for his crime, but the bank that facilitated Madoff and his Ponzi scheme, they just paid a penalty. Epstein went to jail, but the company that facilitated thousands of his sex trafficking transactions, they just get to pay a fine. How is this possible?
Well, I have an expression, it's good to be rich. So when you're really rich, you just pay fines, which are not very, even though $1 billion sounds like a lot to you or me, when you're JP Morgan Chase, $1 billion, I mean, you make $1 billion a week, let's say. So they can absorb that. Now, the banks are supposed to know your customer. That's an expression that came around the last 10 years. So here's another issue about the banks. They allow Sharia-compliant financing. Well, what that means is they have a loan to some Muslim country or business, and some of the profits or paid off to some Muslim organization, and that goes to whoever it goes to. The banks have no clue where the money's going, no clue who the Muslim intermediary organization is. They don't know their customer, and they participate in Sharia-compliant financing. That's another example of an Epstein-like example or a Madoff-like example that they don't want to know, and they just want the business. And then if someone says, "Oh, we changed the rules," what you did was providing material support for terrorism, they say, "Okay, so fine me $2 billion, see if I care." And that's why they get away with not murder, but they get away with unethical behavior.
I still think that there's something very wrong with a system that allows criminal banks, genocidal banks, to just pay a fee and go on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. I want you to hold for my closing word of wisdom just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my very brilliant guest, Joseph Gebeily of Beirut, and author Ken Abramowitz. Plus, I thank my talented international team, including Richard in the Philippines, Virginia in New Jersey, Christine in Indiana, Wes in San Francisco, Holly in Nashville, and many others in numerous additional cities around the world. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, iTunes, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 325 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, and my latest, Israel Strikes Iran. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com and click books. Get access alerts to participate in live future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced an exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button like tens of thousands of others have. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Every man has fire, but are you a candle or are you a torch? I'm zooming out from our nation's capital. Bless all of you. Pray for all that is unfolding before our very eyes.